And our next session is about the political year ahead. This conference is not just about one set of people saying what should happen. This is an alliance. An alliance is many voices, plural issues, especially in the food system, which is so complex. But we have lots of wonderful specialist campaigners, policy specialists, and we have invited 7 people to come forward with a pencil portrait of the political year ahead and exploring the solutions to keeping food issues on the political plate. So I'm going to invite the wonderful Jyoti Fernandes from the Landworkers Alliance to come forward first to talk about agroecology. And Jyoti, just to remind you, I'll have the hooter and I will hoot it at 2 minutes. So I'm not being rude, but I just need to give a bit of time to keep this many voices on the stage. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, I was going to talk about what's just been going on with the ELMS, the development of the environmental land management schemes. There's been a whole load of us which are in Sustain, loads of different organizations on the engagement group to try and develop the new ELMS. And Sustain has been working super hard on this, and it's just been absolutely amazing. And there was an announcement last week that came out to show, just where we've gotten to, which I think was exciting in many ways, disappointing in other ways. And maybe I'll just talk to that just to show you where we think we need to go to try and keep pushing for better environmental land management schemes. I mean, first of all, there was something in the announcement that said central to everything was the new pilots on healthy soils and grassland. And I think that's absolutely critical. And it's really great that that was right front and center of what happened with the new schemes, because with the pilot, they're going to think about healthy soils as a way to sequester carbon. And in there, they made a commitment to organic payments, which is really all about getting agroecology into things. Now, that's been something quite a lot of us have been banging on for absolutely ages. And by working together as a coalition of different groups under Sustain, we were able to really push that forward and talk to Victoria Prentice and get some sort of commitment in there. But it's just a little bit of a long time frame. So we're going to keep pushing on that and try and get them to commit to that a bit earlier than where they're committed to it at. And they're also thinking on developing things like on integrated pest management, reduction of nitrate fertilizers, and all sorts of things that bring agroecology to the forefront. There's some particular issues that we're really concerned about within the Landworkers Alliance, in that they've made a commitment to horticulture, because we all know that fruit and veg is incredibly important, and we've really got to support the horticulture sector. It's actually something we felt was a big shortfall in the National Food Strategy, the amount of time that was dedicated to how much we need to support the horticulture sector, and particularly small scale horticulture farms. These are our market gardens where there's a tremendous amount of community engagement, ones that are, supplying through direct supply chains like community supported agriculture and box schemes, and that sort of farm that actually communicates with the public, engages the public, brings school children and adults and all sorts of people up there to learn about healthy food and nutrition and seasonal vegetables. And we also wanted to see
just
more of a commitment.
30 seconds, Jyoti, just another 30 seconds.
There we go, to below 5 hectare farms. And they have made a commitment in there, and they keep talking about these sorts of things, but it's not soon enough. And these small farms, these below 5 hectare farms, is where we get support for new entrants to diversity, both of people and agrobiodiversity and agriculture. And we've got to all work together to make sure small farms, fruit and veg, and all those elements of public engagement are more centrally recognized in the new schemes. Thank you.
Fabulous. I hate cutting you off, Jyoti, because if in my world you would rule the world and we'd all be backing you up. So can I now move on to the equally fabulous Vicki Hurd from Sustain to talk about supply chains? Thank you.
Hi, Kath. Thanks very much. I'm head of farming at Sustain. And a year ago, at this very meeting, I promised that we'll be launching a campaign around better, fairer, more farmer-focused supply chains. We want 25% farmer-focused supply chains by 2035. And so that's a big ask. It's a big ambition, and we're certainly not going to do it in the next year, Kath. But what we did over the last year was survey farmers and do a lot of work to prepare for what we want to ask for. And that farmer survey, 500 farmers, made it very clear that they need better supply chains. They need money for infrastructure. They need advice and support so that they can add value on farm, so they can work together and work through food hubs to sell their produce collectively, ideally into the public plate through dynamic procurement. They asked for much more support in developing those kind of new supply chains. And there was lots of barriers in the report, lots of interesting insight, lots of despair as well. It's fair to say a lot of farmers feel despair at the trade deals being made and everything, which will undercut them because the imports will be coming in at lower standards potentially, etc., etc. So what we've done is we've set the scene, and we presented the report to MPs last week, and there's a news item on our website if you want to read that, with a wonderful presentation from Josiah Meldrum from Hobdodds, who describes a whole new way of thinking about supply chains as a network of relationships and at a local and regional level, which will allow more of the money to get to the farmer, but not higher prices for the consumer. We're not talking about elite, extremely expensive food. It's about good food for everybody at local level or regional level through better, shorter, fairer supply chains and less money being siphoned out. So the key things we're asking for is a vision for this, and it'd be great if we got this year, but one thing we might be able to do this year is to get a recognition of farmer-focused supply chains being a focus for money from the Levelling Up Fund or the local enterprise partnerships or Shared Prosperity Fund, and a recognition of dynamic procurement as a key way to do this, and planning rules. We'll be campaigning on all this year and get planning rules supporting local food systems, infrastructure and supply chains. Critical, missing part of the picture. Better food trading is absolutely critical for everything we're talking about today.
That's brilliant. Oh my goodness me, if only Jyoti and Vicki ruled the food world. I'm going to bring in the person who's going to follow on from that, thoughts about trade and threats to farming standards and environmental standards, who is the wonderful Angela Francis from WWF.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
I'll wave the horn around about the time when you should finish. Thank you very much, Angela.
Thank you, Kath. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to talk about trade, which Vicki just touched on. Trade is this enormously powerful driver of global prosperity and innovation, but the UK government have not figured out a way to harness it, harness that power so it supports the transition to sustainable agriculture. In fact, they are making things worse. What a massive waste. The UK could be leading the way in regenerative agriculture that will feed us and sit alongside new ways to generate value from land with climate mitigation, adaptation and restoration of assets. And the new trade agenda is actually about how we address the transition to a green economy when countries are moving at different speeds and some aren't moving at all. The thinking on this is happening in industrial goods. There's lots of conversations around carbon border adjustments to act on imports from countries who've got low or no carbon taxes at home. And for fishing, the US are ensuring all its imports are from fisheries that have got comparable levels of protection for seals and dolphins as they require in the US. But there is a big gap on thinking about trade in agricultural goods. We have no environmental criteria for farming. None. Nothing. Core standards is the answer here. And we are urging government, urging I think is the word I've taken from COP, strongly means we are urging government to look at this again, look at the recommendations they've had from the Trade and Agriculture Commission, from the National Food Strategy and from the Committee on Climate Change, to look at these core standards with fresh eyes. And there are different versions of core standards, but they've always got two elements. It's the issue you're addressing, what you care about in the standard, that's animal welfare on the environment side, water stress, toxicity, soil health, habitat protection, and the mechanism by which you apply it. And that's labels, you've been talking about that today, and tariffs, but the mechanism that WWF are talking about is minimum market access, a minimum threshold for any foods that come into the UK, sold in the UK, wherever it's produced. And importantly, we have time to do this. So the minimum thresholds will be agreed in UK law, not in a trade deal. We don't have to negotiate with anybody else. We set them ourselves, and that will be on the political plate, I guarantee you, next year.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that and all of your work over the last year on the trade stuff that's been going on behind the scenes. It's a hard slog, I know that. Next up is the wonderful Kate Anstey from Child Poverty Action Group talking about universal free school meals.
Thanks, Kath. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about 3 points today in relation to universal free school meals. So firstly, the point that the current free school meals eligibility system is wholly inadequate. For those of you that don't know, at present around 1 million children who live below the poverty line do not currently qualify for a free school meal each day. And that's mainly because their parents are in work, but they simply can't escape poverty. And it can't be right that those children that we know are living on such a low income miss out on the benefits of a free school meal. Importantly, action has been taken in some of the UK nations, which I'll come on to. The second point is a more broad point about education generally. Education and school is supposed to be free to access across the UK, and in theory, this kind of great leveler for our children. But I'm afraid this kind of simply isn't the case, because school food, along with other things, come with a kind of significant cost to many families. And if you can't afford it, then your child can't fully engage and participate in their seemingly free education. It just becomes out of reach. So I think if we want our children to thrive and be able to make the most of school, then I ask why on earth we stop at providing school food for children and make them pay for that aspect. At Child Poverty Action Group, we believe that universal free school meals should be just one part of the school experience, and it needs to be universal, because as soon as there's that means test in place, we know that children will miss out on free school meals who need them. We also know that children who are eligible will face kind of stigma and shame because they are in receipt of free school meals. And this is what we hear time and time again from our research in schools with pupils. Finally, as I mentioned, Scottish and Welsh governments have recognised that universal free school meals deliver on multiple policy objectives, and they agree that they're a transformative intervention in terms of child poverty. So they've both committed to providing free school meals to primary school children across their nations. So the question is, how do we keep this on the political plate? I think Wales and Scotland are on the right track, and hopefully their policies will show that there's also a strong case for including this and sort of expanding this to secondary school pupils. But Northern Ireland and England are falling behind, particularly in England. Once these policies are implemented in other nations, England will have the harshest or least generous free school meals policy across the UK. So a child in Newcastle will go to school facing the fact that they won't have a meal each day, and their cousins in Scotland or Wales won't have to worry about that. So England will be the kind of poor relation compared to their cousins. Stop there.
Thank you so much, Katie. I think the flip between trade policy to universal free school meals, sometimes I'm asked, what sort of issues do you work on? And I sometimes want to answer, what sort of issues do we not work on? Food touches into everything. So thank you so much for something that we really want to help fix. And once again, the duty's on government to make sure that every child can enjoy a really good meal at school as a normal part of the day and be introduced to good food and where it comes from is absolutely the right agenda for us all to be working on. Thank you so much. I'm now going to move to the wonderful Barbara Crowther, my colleague, to talk about the salt and sugar tax. Barbara is coordinator of the Children's Food Campaign.
Good afternoon, everyone, and just want to say here and hurrah for Scotland and Wales on the back of the last one. 2022 will be the 5th anniversary of the soft drinks industry levy. Now, according to Dolly Tace and Martin White at Cambridge University, there have been 689 obesity policies by the government between 1992 and 2020, and yet the latest National Child Measurement data shows a really alarming increase in the prevalence of obesity and overweight amongst primary school children leaving primary school. One of the few policies that has successfully removed 44 million kilograms of sugar from soft drinks is our soft drinks industry levy, which Sustain campaigned for. And the evidence shows that it has taken 30 grams of sugar per week out of household diets. Now, the National Food Strategy has proposed how do we break the junk food cycle as part of actually getting policies that really have impact. And I noted that last year we spent over £5 million on cakes and biscuits and another £1.5 billion on sweets and confectionery, and none of these are part of the kind of levy or use of tax and fiscal measures. So we absolutely support the recommendation of the National Food Strategy to bring in further industry level levies upstream that will trigger the things that will make high-fat salt and sugar products less profitable to manufacture in the first place, more difficult to market and sell, and then less desirable to purchase. And the National Food Strategy's proposal around a sugar and salt reformulation tax suggested that a £3 per kilo tax on sugar and a £6 kilo tax on salt would potentially take around 4 to 10 grams of sugar out of our diets, could raise up to £3 billion per year in revenues that we could be then returning into healthy food and healthy diets. So whilst building on Will Nicholson's comments about the introduction of mandatory reporting, I think we need to back that. It's a good idea to introduce mandatory reporting, voluntary reporting, voluntary sugar reduction. We will see the report in January. It's going to show that confectionery sugar is outweighing all the gains we're making from the soft drinks industry levy. So we need to bring confectionery, biscuits, cakes and other processed goods into tax, and that's why we need to keep that on the political plate and make sure mandatory reporting is accompanied by fiscal incentives to make it happen.
Fantastic, nailed it. Thank you, Barbara. That's absolutely wonderful. And I'm going to move straight on to my colleague from Sustain, Ruth Westcott, who is going to talk about less and better meat. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Imagine following in that. Thanks, Barbs. Well, it's been a big year for climate change. It's been quite a sexy topic all year. It's just a shame that that really hasn't been about food. The National Food Strategy was quite big on meat. It dedicated 4 chapters to the topic. But when it came to the recommendations, it was quite thin on specific recommendations about dietary change and less and better meat. At the same time, public attitudes are definitely changing, and they're changing quite quickly, with more and more people saying that they want to reduce the amount of meat that they're eating. So where do we move forward policy-wise? Well, firstly, government meals should exemplify and actually celebrate what a sustainable and healthy diet looks like. The panel have been brilliant on procurement, so I won't say any more than that. Secondly, it's over to you, UK government. Food and farming now needs to be included in our government's nationally determined contributions for meeting the Paris Agreement. Denmark has become the first country to make a legally binding plan to reduce emissions from its food system. So if Denmark can do it, I don't see any reason why any other country can't do it. At COP26, the UK signed led and signed a global pledge to cut methane emissions. But unfortunately, when it was announced, Ursula von der Leyen said, the greatest potential for cuts is without any doubt the energy sector. Well, I would say, no, there is a lot of doubt. And the biggest potential for cuts is the food and farming sector. That's where methane emissions are rising most quickly. So that really needs to be a core of the global methane pledge, and we need to be campaigning on that this year. And Boris needs to really lead on that as the COP president. So it's up to us as NGOs in the UK to make sure that Boris sees that as his responsibility. Thirdly, I'm looking at you food businesses. We need proper fair pricing policies at every point. We can't have poor quality factory farmed meat products cheaper and more readily available than healthy and sustainable options with less and better meat. I am a huge fan of the Greggs sausage roll, but I don't think the vegan option should be the same price as the factory farmed meat option. Thanks, Kath. Finally, we need to look at the ways that we can act on a local level, including serving great food in schools, making council land available for sustainable food growing, and supporting great food businesses, markets and pop-ups to rejuvenate our high streets, and finally tackle the advertising of climate damaging food. We'll have loads more of this in Sustain in the coming year, so I look forward to working with you more. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for that whistle-stop tour around climate policy. Next up is the lovely Liz O'Neill from GM Freeze, another of our members who is fighting on valiantly, often in the background, but is vital important to understand how we keep control of technologies and make sure we're actually moving towards agroecology, not just to a corporatized version of food and farming. So thank you very much, Liz. You've got 2 minutes.
Great, thank you. So I was asked to speak about gene editing, and the first thing I'm going to say is that gene editing is GM with better PR. And the reason I say that is that it's changing DNA in the lab, which can and does go wrong. It's patented, and it will be used to prop up industrial agriculture. So, you know, gene edited GM techniques, along with all other GM techniques, are already legal, but they're regulated. That regulation was done in Brussels. We can now do it ourselves. So the UK already has the power to approve as many GMOs as it wants, as quickly as it likes. But the Westminster government isn't happy with that, and they're trying to change the definition of a GMO to give new techniques a free pass. That means no risk assessments, no traceability, and no way to prevent contamination, including in the organic food chain. They're starting that. What they've already announced is changes around gene-edited GMOs that could have been produced through traditional breeding. And I've done the quotes there because ministers have been unable to say how they're going to define that. And the reason for that is it makes no sense whatsoever. That's not a scientific statement. You know, what could have happened. So it's on a very, very dodgy footing. And all of that is happening despite the overwhelming rejection of this exact plan in DEFRA's own consultation on the subject. So GM Freeze and Beyond GM have spent much of the past year trying to get the agroecology movement to engage with this threat. We've had some really good work from a few organisations, a few have been fantastic, but generally I have to say it's been a real uphill struggle. We are here as specialists following the detail, but we cannot fight this on our own. We need sustained members to get actively involved to really engage with this. We're going to be running a briefing webinar thing with the title as yet to be decided with support from Sustain very soon. We're going to get invitations out to the Sustain list. So please sign up, come along. And in the meantime, you know, get in touch with me, get in touch with Pat Thomas about how we can support your organisation to get over its qualms about engaging with GM, because if you don't do it soon, it is going to be too late. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. That's really wonderful. I'm now going to go into the Q&A and find the things that have been voted up to put to this panel of wonderful people. We've only got a few minutes before the break, but I'm going to ask the one that's come up top. The Levelling Up white paper is landing in January. This is from Emily O'Brien at Food Matters. Yes, at Food Matters now. The Levelling Up white paper is landing in January and is the political priority for government, they say. How can we best ensure that a basic right to food is seen as part of the Levelling Up agenda? Who feels like they'd like to answer that? Please jump in. You're not feeling like talking about levelling up?
I can talk about levelling up. We called our event last week Levelling Up, about the supply chains. It sounds very technical to everybody, supply chains infrastructure, but if some of that fund could be diverted towards better supply chains that are feeding people, school children, etc., then that would ensure to some extent you're matching farmers' incomes to good food going into the public plate. That will be one way of levelling up, but also seeing it as part of the levelling up strategy.
That's really helpful. And quite a lot of what we've been saying in these sessions is how to direct some of the money that flows down to the right places. Barbara, you came off mute.
I did, but I think Kate might be about to say exactly what I'm going to say. So I'm going to pass it to you, Kate.
Oh, I don't know. I was just going to say that as per what I said in my talk, that at the moment, as I say, England are the poor relation when it comes to school meals and universal approach. So I think that's a good place to start.
I think there's plenty of evidence as well to show that a universal approach in school food actually is more successful in targeting children living in lower income households in increasing uptake. It increases uptake amongst those who would have been eligible previously but weren't taking up their entitlement due to all sorts of other factors to do with enrolment and stigma. So automatic enrolment for free school meals is something that we should be calling for, as well as universal approaches. And so that those two things would help absolutely create a much leveler school environment around food, where it's just communal and everybody's eating the same stuff.
We've also got a question from Martin Yarnett, saying a 25% target, which I think is directed at Vicki, around local food infrastructure, local food systems. 25% target implies a vast increase in local infrastructure. Have you any idea how much that might cost and the impact on the supermarket share of the market? And I presume Jyoti might like to come in on that as well.
Yeah, shall I start? It's a really good question, and I don't have all the economic answers at the moment. We're actually seeking funding to do some economic analysis because so much has been spent over the last 30, 40 years on a very centralized, concentrated food system in the UK. So changing that is it's effectively a wicked problem, but we can see some examples of how it can be done. We just need to scale that up and find investors, even impact investors who are interested in supporting agroecological farming because of the climate and biodiversity outcomes, or the jobs outcomes, or the training outcomes. People might want to invest in that in smaller scale, but not inefficient. We're not talking about inefficient, but smaller and more directed and more direct farming system, farmer to consumer systems, cutting out the middleman or the middle person, which it takes so much of the money. About 90% of the money doesn't go to farmers and producers. They get about 8 to 10% of the gross value added in the food system. That is not sustainable in the long term. So those kind of investments will be needed. Sorry, I'm not answering your question, but we do want to do a lot more economic work. We need an economist to help us to do that.
We've come now to the time when we're going to have a break. I've got Jyoti coming off mute and Ruth with her hand up. Is it possible for you to keep that quite short? Because we do want to give people a chance to have a bit of a break, stretch their legs. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. I just think the money to invest in these local foods can actually come from existing streams just being really developed and focusing more strongly on local food, having some sort of equity in how we distribute our subsidy payments, the shared prosperity fund, the rural development funds, where we look at our food strategy going and putting the innovation funding. A lot of this could be going towards local food because it results in all the things that these funds are actually aiming for. We just need to figure out how to rechannel it.
Yes, very clever. I like that. Ruth?
Yeah, it wouldn't cost money. It would generate money in farming communities because every pound that you spend on food bought locally generates £3 for the economy of the local area. So it would generate money rather than cost money. We just have to see this as a longer term rather than a very short term issue. And in fact, I don't know what the government can possibly have in mind for levelling up in fishing communities and farming communities if it isn't food and the agri-food sector. Like, what else is it? So yeah, for me, it's right in the heart of the levelling up agenda. Thanks.
That is brilliant. And I'm just going to go to a comment that Tim Lang, hello Tim, lovely to see you there. It's always wonderful when you're present at our events, saying that levelling up is Orwellian speak. It's another fiction alongside the older one of trickle down. The agenda sustain and NGOs surely ought to pursue is for inequality reduction. Yes, yay Tim, yay Tim. Thank you so much for commenting in that way, and I can see other people in the chat have picked up on that as well. I'm going to bring this session to a close. What I would like everybody to note is there's lots going on in the food world, and there are some people who need support in that around food standards, around agroecology, around local food infrastructure, around gene editing, GM, in whatever guise it's coming through, in whichever PR it's wearing these days, and also around development of things like universalism on free school meals and things like sugar and salt taxes. So please get involved, please get on our mailing lists, otherwise you won't hear about what's going on. I'm going to give you a break now because you've